Good afternoon and good morning for those of you on the Pacific Coast. Today, for our weekend wellness hour, we have body psychotherapist Stephen Buehler, who is going to be joining us today. And he has very unique background, unique experiences, and a unique treatment method that he helps people who are in all kinds of stress or crisis or trauma. And I wanted to bring him in today to share with us, one, because I've heard him speak before and he has great information to share, but also we have all suffered a lot over the past year and just even over the course of our lives. And so sometimes having new tools or new approaches to dealing with our emotions, dealing with our mind and our mindset can really start us on a new journey and give us some hope where we didn't think hope was possible before. So I welcome Stephen. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, Amy. It's been my pleasure to get to know you, and I'm really happy to be here. So thank you so much.
I appreciate that. So I'd love if you could tell us a little bit about your journey into becoming a psychotherapist, because you had a different life beforehand, and what
Mhm.
led you into this career to help people in this way?
Well, I've been doing it for about 20 years, but I've been working for longer than that. I right out of college, I was in marketing and advertising, and that moved into business development and consulting. So it had a lot of relational kind of work and analytic work, and I actually like all that.
Mhm.
But I also felt, and at that time too, my own body, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder that resulted in some pain in my body. So that kind of led me on a trajectory of self-discovery and inquiry, mindfulness and meditation and things along those lines. I went to grad school, became a therapist, worked with kids who, were sadly very traumatized, removed from their homes from abuse or neglect. But then the last maybe 13 years, I've been at a large healthcare organization here on the West Coast and other places. And my role has been to support, I'm kind of a consultant within the organization to, help the doctors and the nurses individually and collectively, with team things, stressors and strains, adverse outcomes, critical incidents. We've had wildfires in my specific location very regularly for years. So a lot of, difficult stuff. And so it's been my pleasure to grow as a person and discover. And that's a little thumbnail about my journey.
Yeah. Now, and we know, especially for the past year, that healthcare workers can get burned out.
Mm.
That when they see that they're not making the impact they're used to making, that they can have some trauma related to that. And so I could imagine, especially if you're working with, first responders who've dealt with wildfires, I can imagine that gives you a different insight into what happens to a person when they have trauma that really takes over them or a highly charged emotional event.
Well, what I notice a lot for people who have high capability and are really kind of on purpose, in their lives, like the people that I work with in healthcare, to a T mostly are, the dilemma is that there's what solves the problem in terms of how the action works. Let's say it's try harder or do more.
Mhm.
A lot of people, they solve most of the problems in their life just that way, just a little more effort
Yeah.
and it's done.
Yeah.
But in these kind of intense situations that can be collective or maybe personal, where that's not working, or I keep trying harder and there's more work, or, that doesn't give me ease or satisfaction of completion as I hoped it would. That's where, sometimes people come to see me or others,
Mhm.
just to like work through that dilemma. And, so the work around the body dynamics, is to kind of put a highlighter on, under stress, we can respond with sympathetic activation, kind of go, go,
Yeah.
go. And that's super helpful. Except if you cross some lines or, cranky or this or that, irritability can kind of, sneak out there if you're normal human person,
Yeah.
and then on the other side, we can kind of be like, who cares? I'm just exhausted, or, whatever, you do whatever you want. We can move into those more foggy kind of spaces. Again, no
Yeah.
problem. That's meditation. That's just rest sometimes. and then their trauma extremes, they can be more pronounced. But it's just, for me, I've always, I'm kind of a weirdo, I guess, this way, this inquiry of getting to know myself, and those patterns in my body, because of my personal history, my family history, my culture, that's all very, very fascinating to me. So maybe this will inspire. I'm sure everybody listening and you yourself have that passion too. It's just that everybody likes it's just that, oh, that tastes like this. It's so interesting. So it's neat to have these forums and to talk about shop like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you've had some training in what's called somatic work or body-based kind of experiential training. Can you dive into that? Kind of explain to people, what does that mean? Like, what is
Well,
it?
there's a lot of different, the popular kind of, if you will, brand names out there are more like somatic experiencing. There's sensory motor psychotherapy. Some of the other words are trauma informed therapy or trauma sensitive. You might have heard of trauma informed mindfulness, trauma informed yoga. It's all referencing essentially, the framework is that there are adaptive survival systems in our bodies. I say to clients sometimes, you don't have to remember to jump out of the way of the bus. You'll just do it, and then you'll be like, what happened? So we have in us innately, thankfully, beautifully, these hardwired responses for survival. And depending on the privilege that you hold, or the life that you've led, or the experiences that you've had, all of that wisdom is sort of encapsulated in who you are.
Yeah.
It's not really personality exactly, but it comes in the form of impatience or aversion, all that stuff that's why I'm not on any what are the reality shows, because everybody's got it. It's like, knowing this stuff doesn't make you immune to those patterns, but
Right.
essentially the work of a somatic psychotherapist, I think, is to help somebody sort of slow down, get to know their pattern, love their pattern. There's something useful about it, but also make variation and explore differences, and the power of this interpersonally and professionally, it can be, pretty high. It's kind of for me, I think of it as the kind of core material that drives things like an influence or emotional intelligence or relationship happiness, things like that. So, it's sort of the water that we swim in. Can we discover
Absolutely.
it, and can we work with it? Find ways that ideally it feels good. It feels fun to discover. That's kind of what I'm always looking for. Does that resonate with you, Amy? Does that make, I'm
Yeah.
guessing it makes sense given your work. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I find that people store mental and emotional stressors, trauma, energy in different parts of their body.
Mm.
So I find it often in their breastbone and their xiphoid process just below the breastbone, in their armpits and in the front of their hips. There's these areas where, when they've gone through something that's not considered positive, something that's considered negative or traumatizing, that it goes into the body and it just sits there,
Yeah.
and they guard. And so part of it is helping them, one, recognize that and be aware of it. Sometimes that's all they can tolerate and that's all they can handle. But then after a while, after they've sat with it for, a day to a week, they might be able to start to change that and release it. So I would imagine part of somatics, as you're trying to get people to experience things about their body and to feel things, I could see how that could work alongside to really help someone start to change the experience that's still inside their body.
Yeah. You're really right on it. And I think there's right at the core kind of material for most people is that you're right. There is this sort of, the way I describe it is like, I haven't been on a roller coaster for a long, long time, but when when I was on them, as it went up, I would, I get,
Yeah.
and I push my feet into the ground. I get ready. This is going to be intense.
Yeah.
So that's happening unconsciously sometimes for us, and it is adaptive and quite useful. If you will, defense mechanisms kind of have a bad rap, but
Yeah.
they're really useful and helpful. And and say to everybody, embrace yours. And because slower is better, in my opinion, with this stuff. It's as you notice the whole thing, that does bring up a lot, and to find the way to sort of, it's almost like build scaffolding around it, with
Yeah.
other, so, it could be another person's hands, it could be an external support, but it's useful to feel your own support as you kind of let go. I do a lot of what I call old man yoga now, which
Uh-huh.
is, I'm not that old, but I just mean like, my body gets creaky, and
Mhm.
it's not as athletic as it was when I was younger. So, for me, I'm noticing some of the creaks and stuff, and I'm like, oh, I better be careful there. So I try to support myself with my musculature as another part releases.
Mhm.
So there's layers of me that are working in kind of dynamic harmony, and I might also use a bolster or something outside to give me some structure, just as a kind of real life example of what I mean about how to kind of work with these layers, and how the body kind of kind of internal dynamic of itself has great wisdom,
Yeah.
and sometimes doing something really well too much. Yeah.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I also see we fall into patterns like you were mentioning earlier, that we develop these habits and responses
Mm,
that sometimes we're not even aware of. So when
mm,
we have a certain trigger, we respond a certain way and we guard a certain way, which leads to the same type of response over time. So when you are working with someone, do you help them in a certain way to recognize those patterns, and do you guide them differently, or do you just allow them to choose their path to a different one or stay the same?
I'd say a lot of how I have learned to work, is I was just explaining this actually moments ago with a client. I think there's great value in noticing first, like what's happening now, and like really where you are, and not ideally without any, if you can, to suspend the idea of there is better.
Yeah.
So it's not that, if I'm suffering, I'm in this, very overwhelming state, I'm not saying, no, that's great, get out of it, in the way that you
Yeah.
do.
Mhm.
But just to sort of like, so here, for me, I'll give an example. When I first started doing this work, I was beginning in the my healthcare support kind of journey. The system and the energy had some intensities to it. So I was kind of walking around uptight a lot, and very unconsciously. So that was my holding space. And I was kind of doing my Yosemite Sam a little bit. I wasn't
Yeah.
mad necessarily, but that was how I was kind of making connection, like this is nervous, or I'm
Yeah.
nervous.
Yeah.
So I wasn't trying to go, oh, that's bad, make it better. This is better. You know,
Yeah.
I was trying more instead to say, oh, here I am. How much of this do I need? One of my
Yeah.
teachers, had that beautiful invitation to me over many years. How much do I need? And, so then I was able to discern, with using other, aspects of my body, I was able to create ways to do less of that, do less of that. and
Mhm.
and the practice became sort of attending, or sort of lingering in a kind of sensate experience of that less than, so I could grow that neurologically, in a way.
Right.
Don't want to get
Right.
too wonky, I bet people understand that, but it's, if I'm lingering and I'm thinking less and I'm feeling less, that gives me an ability to be there again with intention. So it's kind of applied mindfulness in a way. It's sort of, if they're saying don't try to change anything, I'm like, yeah, you can change some things. There's some dials here. You can use breath, you can use structure and intensity, you can use movement. There are ways to kind of work with your own system, and I would say about me, my own baggage, if you will, that gives me more possibility. So yeah, I think it's great. It's not everybody's cup of tea. The kind of little secret is that you can do, in my field, we'd say cognitive behavioral work, very mentalized work. It's doing the same thing. People are just thinking it and they're not tuning into the body, but the body also changes. So
Yep.
that's my point of view. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I can see if the method that you're describing too, as you are asking yourself, do I need this? And you're shifting, it's a gradual shift. So it's less of a radical change where your nervous system's likely to put up that resistance or barrier, which then if you make a radical change and you get this barrier and resistance, then you have a conflict. And a lot of times we try to avoid a conflict so we don't go back to that solution,
Yeah.
which it may have served us if it had been done slower.
Well, I'll say it like this: that very body, like maybe about 15 years ago, I was skiing, and I kind of pulled. I did a little bit of rotator cuff pull. Wasn't that,
Okay.
I mean, everybody, right?
Yeah.
So it wasn't so bad that I needed any surgery. I just kind of rehabbed it by myself, mostly just kind of moving it around and being gentle and noticing when I would hit some of those edges.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'd move too far into kind of a vulnerable space, my body would have that response to grip itself with
Yeah.
structure, in a reactive way. So I began to discern how to slow that down. I could feel its need for that, but I could get out of it without having to make that happen in my body, if that makes any sense. I bet people who kind of have that, rehab-y, especially if you're, an ultra athlete kind of person, where
Mm-hmm.
you really do need to intentionally restore yourself,
Yes.
probably have some sense of the value of not doing something, and sort of lingering in the I'm not doing it, intentionally.
Yes, absolutely. And I actually even have worked with athletes too, and even non-athletes when they get an injury,
Mm,
to do specialized breathing, to breathe out and calm their nervous system down. So the protective mechanism that typically kicks in and has our muscles splint ourselves and guard,
yeah,
we can get that to minimize. And so their ability to move gets restored, which helps flesh out the area where there was an injury. And their injury recovery time goes through the roof. It's so much faster
mm,
because you've blocked a little bit of an excessive protective mechanism that can show up. And so it gives people control back. And it also helps them realize that they can experience the pain, be aware of it, but also control the response of it.
yeah.
It's very powerful.
Yeah, just to, and I say to clients, it's cool to wave at that pain from 10 miles away, if
Yeah.
that's how you want to do it, or
Mhm.
or even ignore it. And it's also great as you feel comfortable to kind of move closer.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know you know that too, but just that, for me, that
Mhm.
feels really where the artistry, I guess, of it is. It just feels to me very honoring of the person, where they're at, what they can handle. In my field, and maybe this is something you're familiar with, but we speak about this concept of a window of tolerance.
Mhm.
Have you heard of that? Should I,
I
what that?
have, but let's go through it because I know there's people who haven't heard of
Yeah.
it.
Well, it's just interesting because what it's saying is that, mental, emotional, physical health, that kind of body-mind interface,
Mhm.
it's working well if I can feel and I'm aware of my feelings at the same time.
Mhm.
And when our circuitry kind of trips, we're in survival states. We're not as aware, just like that jump out of the way of the bus kind of thing, or the body just kind of dissociates because I'm being hurt. It's all very adaptive, but the patterns, right, as a solution, like maybe this is dangerous, so I better just dissociate. That's the window of tolerance concept is one that says, stay where you're aware of what you're doing as you exercising your kind of feeling and being experience of yourself.
Yeah.
So just to not do harm, because this stuff is, um, it's intense. It's
Yeah.
really can be very intense. So yeah, slower is better in my opinion.
Absolutely. So we also had a discussion before about chronically acute stress and how it impacts people's bodies.
Mm.
Can you dive into what do you mean by chronically acute stress and kind of what do you see? How does it show up in people?
Well, I mean, I was thinking about that question because it's one that I knew you would ask, and I
Mhm.
thought I'd answer it in a couple ways. I mean, one is, you could imagine chronic acute stress as going to the boxing gym, or running marathons.
Yeah.
It's intentional stress. you know. So, on one hand, it grows and it builds something. You create capacity to store and use energy in a certain way. um, but the threshold of between kind of like I'm having fun running versus this is overwhelming is around safety, and
Yeah.
survival. So, we have in our bodies, there's research around this idea of something called neuroception, which is really far out. It's essentially saying, it's kind of the thing where it's like somebody's looking at me and then there they are, they're looking at me, so this sort of, I don't know if it's spidey sense or sixth sense exactly, but it's more of a body based awareness of safety and proximity.
Mhm.
So it's kind of hardwired in us. And so having something that's not safe chronically means that a person, their body adapts to that, and
Right.
they're more aware of potential not safety, and they're faster to their safety remedies, like get out of here or fight somebody, or let's say like pretend like my body's not here, as extreme remedies. So those, that's the kind of thing that, please talk to your psychotherapist or get some
Yeah.
help. That's the
Mhm.
maybe PTSD response. But
Yeah.
for people who maybe are in the thick of it, but may not have that kind of acuteness, it can show up more as, um, at least in my experience, brains that don't kind of stop. There's just,
Yeah.
finally their bodies are resting and they've been through a lot, and their brain's like, well, let me jump in with all the brainstorming that we got to figure this problem out.
Yeah.
Or they're tired, they're exhausted, but they can't sleep.
Yeah.
So again, these are, I think, in the realm of psychotherapy. Exercise can help, but it's, I think what can happen to the body is it just gets patterned to a kind of condition. So I sometimes say emotional inflammation. So
Mhm.
some of these things there can be an inflammation response, and just like regular inflammation, it can be helpful. It
Yeah.
can, heal the problem. But if it's chronic, or if you're stuck in it, then finding some ways to use your body, your nervous system differently, really helpful.
Yeah.
Is that resonating and making sense?
Absolutely. And do you also see in these people who are suffering in this manner that little things are big emotional triggers? And it could be something like the glass knocked over on the countertop and
Yeah.
maybe broke or maybe just spilled something, but it's a huge reaction. And there's this huge, a yell or a scream or someone gets really upset, but it's like little things just trigger them. Is that also something that you see?
It is, yeah. I mean, especially these days where we've all been kind of stuck on, no offense, but Zoom meetings, or, things
Yeah.
like that. It's
Yeah.
like, we're all kind of not, in our dynamic worlds, and it feels more constricted and
Mhm.
closed off. I sometimes I just try to remember that I'm in a room, and
Yeah.
I instead of like this little space that we're in, so
Yeah.
that's one noticing that I have. But in my framework, I mean, it's not mine. I mean, it's just from the wisdom traditions from which I came. The language that I choose to use about it is that, if there is this stored up sort of stress energy,
Mhm.
your audience, and you probably heard of this, but Robert Sapolsky's book on why zebras don't get ulcers, I think, is really, really good for this.
Mhm.
It's, his point is basically saying we mobilize, stuff, if in the animal kingdom, if they're doing that, they actually fight people, or things, or they run away, but so they discharge the energy. We can imagine things, and the stock market might crash, I might die, oh, I guess it's okay, but we don't actually run or try or fight anybody. So for me, when somebody's got that kind of kinetic, stored energy, and it comes out, leaking out almost, that's where sometimes having more conscious, fun experiences of, you know, I don't want to say aggression, but, hitting
Yeah.
a punching bag or something,
Hmm.
some kind of fun, safe, consensual, beautiful way to express, what is stored up. And ideally, if it can have some kind of fun emotional content, like I'm going to, sports do this, we yell at the
Yeah.
team, or, we
Hmm.
watch the movie. Oh, I'm so sad, so just kind of trying to create more of those kinds of experiences that are expressive. Maybe there's art or dance or movement. Those are, I think, some really fun ways to, enjoy how your body is designed. So, I think that that just means that I'm just kind of keep trying to keep it in
Hmm.
a little too much. And for some of us, we were kind of trained to do that for our lives,
Yeah.
and some of us
Yeah.
had to do it to stay safe. And so be gentle with that too, and get support, everyone, when needed. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's very powerful to have these other outlets. I can see that because it also distracts your mind too and allows you to shift and not be so focused on whatever trauma that you were experiencing. It almost gives you that break. Like sometimes we just need that break in whatever the trauma we're going through, just to breathe,
Yeah,
figuratively
just to
and
stress.
literally.
And yeah, I would say, like, finding places where your body for real feels safety,
Yeah.
or more safety, so create, people can do that with weighted blankets sometimes,
Hmm.
or just swinging in a hammock, having that kind of sense of your body, swing,
Hmm.
or just, like me on my roller coaster, kind of pushing, not having
Yeah.
but just kind of bringing some grounding or centering,
Yeah.
breath, certainly, all the techniques I'm sure that, you're sharing and that people know. But
Yeah.
yeah, to bring them into those moments, gently. My thing is gently with kindness. That's
Yeah.
the overarching deal with this. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you find that with emotional energy in people, do you find that almost everyone has some kind of charged emotional energy and some people are better at handling it than others? Or is this something that just builds up and kind of bursts and then people need to see someone like you?
Well, I mean, everybody's different in how what they've learned and how their body adapts and how it's, the kind of the logic of their system, of their lineage, if you will, is a little different. But some people some people are more expressive naturally. Some
Mhm.
people are more kind of taking in, or taking, internalizing, more naturally. So again, it's sort of like, I'm not I don't feel myself to be in the business of wanting to correct people, or say, actually, you should do it like this.
Yeah.
I'm sure, like you as well. It's mostly, what's working about what you're doing. Do you sometimes do it too much?
Mhm.
What would be another way to do what you're trying to do, with the
Mhm.
energy, because a lot of the times, if there's, interpersonally, if there's these exchanges of body language and are, these are just sounds, but, they're loud sounds, or they're you can kind of,
Yeah.
you can tell the intention even if you don't even know the language.
Mhm.
So, how to move, this is important to me, everybody listen,
Yeah.
is a way to do it. Or I might go, this is really important to me. Everybody, would you listen?
Yeah.
Is a way to do it. Or, this is important to me. Everybody should, so they're not wrong.
Mhm.
Everybody gets to make all their different choices and have all those different options.
Yeah.
But, kind of what I try to say, are you getting the returns that you want? So I don't think of myself as an investment counselor, but I do say diversify, and,
Mhm.
your strategies, and try to learn new ones,
Yeah.
pick the good stocks, if you will, and how you do stuff. So that's how I think about it. What are you doing? What are the variations, and what are you trying to aim towards, and what's getting in your way,
Yeah.
is kind of the basic framework. Yeah.
That's neat. And so basically you're having a conversation with people to find out what their problem is, but also you're eliciting from them the solution. So you're not just saying you need to do this, this, and this because I'm prescribing one, two, and three, but more you're almost drawing out of them based on their personality, their situation, and what they're
Mm.
going through.
Well, yeah, I think that is true. I definitely have a lens that just naturally does that after all this time. I mean, some of what I will say is my work in some jobs and some roles has been very brief, meaning like I don't see people for very long. So
Yeah.
I think that what that's done to me is that I'm naturally just like, I notice what people are doing that's smart and wise.
Yeah.
Like everybody's doing what makes sense to them, as a starting place, it for real,
Yeah.
So I'm just like, well, let's see what you're doing great, and it looks like you're doing this, but maybe too much. Can you just turn that down a little bit? And, sometimes just that framework is kind of radical. So, yeah, it's mostly, yes, start where you are, um, and let's see what is really smart about that, what's really useful about that, and where can there be some tweaking, some adjustments, a little bit less, a little bit more, around some of these kind of how the body responds things,
Yeah.
so it is very personal. I think it needs to be personal. Everybody has their own way, and and part of this is the relationality of like, let's witness you from that framework of wonder, and not necessarily strongly to correction. It's mostly, that I just think there's something very beautiful about that
Yeah.
works well.
And does your approach change when you're working with more of like healthcare systems and larger groups? Does your approach or anything differ?
Well, I mean, when it's like, I do work with couples and families in California, and I've had a professional role where I've worked a lot with teams. I wouldn't say that I'm at a system quite level, unless you think of what I do as, influencing a system, which I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, it does change. I mean, it just gets more complicated. I mean, the body, gosh, uh, the body is a dynamic, interactive system, maybe the most complicated thing on the planet. I really
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah.
But it seems that way. I mean, we can't make one, so that says something. It just seems to happen magically through biology and such. But sort of tuning into all those dynamics, it gets a little more tricky.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's for me when I'm working with those larger systems. I'm trying to experience the wisdom of all of what's happening, and I'm trying to sort of feel and see what. It's almost like you're aiming for what's going to make everybody happy.
Yeah. The
You know,
collective good.
yeah. What is everybody seeking? What is everybody craving? Where can we align these things? Where is there some difference? And where are we getting in our way? So a lot of it is pointing people back here instead of out there, which that's my flaw as well, so I'm not immune to it.
It's hard to look in that mirror and say, oh, shoot, I have to make some changes to myself, my mindset, what I'm doing. So my
Yeah.
outer world reflects that. So I totally understand.
Right.
Now, if people are thinking, okay, they're listening to this conversation and like, okay, do I need to go see someone or not? Like, what are some of the things that people can ask themselves about? Do I need help? Do I need to go see a psychotherapist or specifically a somatic psychotherapist?
I mean, people, it's kind of choose your own adventure with this stuff.
Yeah.
Sometimes people who are very, very capable and have found success on their own in their lives don't need therapy or coaches or whatever. Sometimes they hit, I had a client many, many years ago who was an ultramarathon runner. Her resiliency came from the running.
Yeah.
And I saw her and she's like, I need to talk to you. I was like, I thought you had everything figured out.
Yeah.
And I didn't mean that in a mean way, but this
Yeah.
person was known to be amazing, and
Yeah.
the running was gone, for at least a short period of time. So it became a crisis. So
Yeah.
sometimes there's sort of, there's unexpected, I would say kind of shocks, business shocks or family shocks or, things. And just having a space to debrief or whatever, that I would recommend people doing that. Or if they're suffering more than they think they need to or should, or there's something that in their relationships or in their teams or in their leadership that's, they just keep repeating patterns that aren't supporting their goals, for themselves
Right.
or the family or whatever. Or just, honestly, people maybe like you, and certainly like I say, a weirdo like this. I like to, self-discovery is interesting. So I'm bought in. Doesn't mean I'm doing everything everywhere, but if something calls to me and it's interesting, I like to check it out a little bit. So, that would be my advice. Just dabble around and, happy to support people in that way. This
Yeah.
really, for me, honestly, is not too much of a commercial. I don't
Yeah.
really have much that I'm offering, but,
Mhm.
people can connect with me on social media, and probably that'll happen over time.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so.
Well, and part of it is we all need people in our lives to help us get to the next step, whatever that is. Is it a better relationship, a better job, a better career, or just better health, or just even we want something to change in our lives? And so it's a matter of meeting that right person that gives us an idea to help us change. And you could be that for many people who are listening to this. You could be saying something that gives someone an aha moment that they didn't think about before. And so part of me asking you that question is someone might need to know what is it that would instigate them reaching out for help, because sometimes we don't know that at all.
I mean, I think, there's two answers I'd say that kind of bring it right back to the body. I mean, one
Mhm.
is if it's very simple. If you're experiencing pain,
Yeah.
you should get that checked out.
Yeah.
It's just as simple as that. And and the other side of that though, is that if you're somebody who's used to pain and you're so good with your pain that you have, because you asked like, happens with the chronic stress? And I
Mhm.
wanted to talk about, which I didn't, is people form calluses.
Yeah.
If you got a rock in your shoe and you got to keep running, you'll probably form a callus eventually. It's going to suck for a while, but
Yeah.
that's what will happen eventually.
Yeah.
So if you sense that you have a callus, or if there's a numbness or a lack of aliveness or vitality, then you sense that there's more. There's lots of ways to get it, but following your intuition, checking out breath work. That's really
Yeah.
spot on. Breath work is
Yeah.
key. Moving your body, leaning into in finding a way to kind of be with a kind of emotional discomfort gently, slowly. All these things are going to help a person, and you can say, I got to become not a sick person, or you could just say, I want to become a more actualized or a better person. So
Yeah.
it's, any of that resonates, just, I mean, talk to your people,
Yeah.
talk to Amy, reach
Yeah.
out to me, I guess,
Yeah.
as would be helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. And so how can people get a hold of you? What's the best way?
Well, I'd say I do have a website. It's
Mhm.
Stephen Buehler MFT.
Mhm.
But that's mostly just with the small private practice that I have with couples and families. I mean, people can reach out to me there. There's a link to kind of one of these bio sites that has other options to connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram. I'm not really
Totally.
that into it, but these days, so I'm just
Yeah.
trying to kind of dip my toe in. But, in places like that, that's no problem. People can reach out to me on Instagram, or, we met on Clubhouse. That's kind of
Yeah.
fun, so there's places to kind of connect and, not even have to feel like you even quote need to pay for stuff. That's
Yeah.
not really the thing. So,
Yeah.
but, I'm happy to talk to people about what their needs are as well.
I appreciate that. And you have a wealth of knowledge. Really appreciate you coming on. And is there any last minute tip or anything that you want to bring up that people just should think about, or, anything else that they need to learn?
Okay, yeah, I'll say, the thing that I consider to be the two most important things with this kind of work is, I mentioned them, but I'll just highlight them again, is
Yeah.
one, to bring great sense of kindness and compassion through any awareness that you might have of yourself, just to really make an effort towards that. And the other piece is to notice, if you are trying to play around and experiment with things, is to notice your incremental change. I sometimes say to folks, if you can remember to slow yourself down about 10% of the time when you're in this thing, you're doing pretty good, So it's don't aim for like I got it. It's hard to do this, and the work is really sometimes very small, but powerful. So just to right size, there's probably some overachievers out there, and I'm
Yes.
like, so yeah, just to go slow and
Yeah.
enjoy if you can. Yeah.
Yeah,
But thank you
absolutely.
for the time.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today and share your knowledge. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yeah, nice to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining us for the Weekend Wellness Hour show. Glad to have you and hope you learned a lot. I know I did. And we will see you again next week. Take care. Bye.